The sturdy earth pony, already aged and aching herself, had marched down to the cloud house and practically lassoed her out of the sky. The Pegasus mare was then subjected to a lecture the likes of which she hadn't heard since Twilight Sparkle was around. The memory had amused her to no end, and before Applejack had finished, she had succumbed to a giggling fit. The orange mare had been taken back a bit. "I know I'm no good with words, but do you have to laugh about it right now?" "No, it's not that, AJ," the Pegasus had chuckled. "You just remind me of Twilight, that's all. You know, the moral stuff and all that." A small smile crept across Applejack's muzzle. "Some pony's gotta do it." She shrugged, and then she got in this long, suffering look on the lines of her face. "Please, Sugar Cube, don't do this. Don't do it to yourself or us. We only just buried Rarity. Don't make us bury you too." The Pegasus mare sat there, quiet and contemplative for a long time. Finally, she raised her dark eyes to Applejack's own and winced at the fearful grief that rested there. I'm sorry," she murmured, and reached out to her friend. "I'm sorry, I was selfish, and it won't happen again." And it really hadn't. She'd learned to contain her despair and her rage and her tears. Even as old as she was, she'd remembered how to channel her overwhelming emotions into healthy practices. They lived for a long time after that, the three friends, the only remainders of the elements of harmony. They stood there together, watching Ponyville as it flourished and grew, and thinking of how much Twilight would have loved to share her knowledge with the fowls, or how Pinkie would have thrown a grand party for the anniversary of Luna's return, or of the way Rarity would have adored the new fashions that came and went. It was a terrible thing to remember, but uplifting at the same time. And then that fateful day came when so many years of Rarity had been torn away, and even longer since Twilight had gone ahead, they found Fluttershy curled up peacefully beneath a tree, her rabbit angel resting between her hooves, just as silent as his caretaker. The Pegasus mare, expecting terrible grief, found herself only at peace with it all. Fluttershy had not gone kicking and screaming, or lost her youth. She'd lived a long, good life, one that she'd spent caring for others, and not just herself. Fluttershy had known it was her time. Of this much the Pegasus was sure, and had accepted it just as willingly. The service was soft and serene, so much like Fluttershy that it brought tears to the Pegasus's eyes. She'd managed to compose herself enough to reminisce on the happy memories of the yellow Pegasus, of which were many. It was a peaceful time that night, and it had eased the mare's fears for her friend. Her fears might have left, though, but her weariness did not. Without Fluttershy to soothe her aches and pains, the Pegasus mare was a tired mess most of the day. Years of her youth spent flying at the speed of sound had left her muscles tightly wound and not one to be easily relaxed. The mare was left limping around the town. Flying was a torturous exercise and a death sentence if done alone. Applejack did her best, but wings were not of her knowledge, and so the Pegasus suffered quietly. She remembered bemoaning it several times to Applejack, made delirious by pain and fever. The Earth Pony had tried everything for her, from medication to massages to herbal remedies, but nothing could ease the fire that the Pegasus mares felt in her bones. Finally, it had been too much for Applejack. "You can go," she told her friend, crying along with her. "You don't have to stay. If it's too much, you can go on." "I can't," the Pegasus had gasped, breathing unsteady, limbs flailing weakly in agony. "I can't." Later, when the mare's fever had broken, she regained some coherency. Applejack had never questioned her words. Even if she had, the mare didn't know if she could explain. The words were true, but how they were and how she knew she could never remember. And so, the years passed in this manner, the Pegasus and the Earth Pony relying on each other with each passing day. Applejack was steady as ever, and slowly the Pegasus mare was learning how to cope. Fowls grew, ponies fell in love, and life went on. Until that day. The Pegasus, the Pegasus mare knew it was coming, so did Applejack, and they had been preparing for it for a long time, straightening out their estates and possessions, despite how little of either remained. It was only a matter of time, really, and who went first. So the Pegasus was not surprised one day when Applejack invited her over to the fields to lay in the sun and remember the old days. She was not surprised, but her heart ached all the same. She lay next to Applejack for the greater part of the day, laughing and crying and gazing at the clouds. The Pegasus had felt her friend's heartbeat from where she had rested against her side. She counted them in her head. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Applejack had breathed in once, twice, and let out a gentle, fading breath, her eyes closing, head lowering gracefully to the ground. The Pegasus had rested her own cheek against her friend's, trembling, and cried. The funeral was modest in furnishing, but overbounding in attendance. Members of the Apple family had come from all over the lands, driven by their devotion to the mare who had been their matriarch for years. The Pegasus had almost felt unwelcome until a smiling apple bloom, grown and lovely, had approached and introduced her as Applejack's greatest friend. The mare had been flattered, nodding a weak reply to all who came to talk with her, and when it came her time to speak, she knew exactly what to say. She wove a tale of honesty and steadiness, of a mare whose courage was unquestioned, and her love for others was never doubted. She regulated them all with stories of Applejack's defining moments, of her bravery against Nightmare Moon and Discord, of her tenderness when she tended to those with a broken heart, of her patience when she dealt with those in need of guidance. The mare knew that she would miss Applejack, and wept bitterly as the dirt covered the casket from sight. Now, as she lay on the very same earth, with only a few feet of ground separating her from her longest surviving friend, she felt conflicted inside. The terrible pain was washing over her again in tides, ebbing and flowing, tugging at her thoughts in one direction and then the next, leaving her tired and anxious, and more weary than she ever felt before. Above her, the darkness had stretched out in its limits, and already the moon was sinking. It was a beautiful sight, but watching it alone, it dulled the colors somehow. The Pegasus huffed in a short breath of laughter, blinking wearily. Her head sank to the ground as she breathed in a familiar, rich scent of the earth. She'd grown so used to the smell of dirt and grass and undergrowth. She could barely recall the way the wind stole the breath from her lungs and the light taste of sky. It was a morning thought that she would never be able to experience again. She closed her eyes, mind drifting off. "Rainbow!" The voice was urgent and rapidly approaching. "Rainbow Dash!" The old Pegasus mare lifted her head, blinking at the darkness. "Scootaloo? Is that you?" The orange mare skidded to a halt next to her, flanks heaving. "Yeah, it's me. I thought... She didn't need to finish her sentence, because the old mare could already imagine what it must have looked like. She chuckled once. "It's okay, Scootaloo. I'm all right, just dozing." "Are you sure?" Scootaloo's voice was hesitant, and she nosed over the old Pegasus anxiously. "I mean, it's only been a few days since, well, you know..." "Applejack's funeral, I know." The Pegasus finished, smiling gently. "You can say it, Scootaloo. I'm no skittish filly. I've experienced my fair share of it." "Right." Scootaloo hung her head. "Sorry." The old Pegasus gave her a gentle nudge. "No need for apologies. You did nothing wrong." She got a flicker of a smile in return, and so she directed the conversation elsewhere. "Why are you here? Not looking for me, I hope." She laughed, though she knew it was a real possibility. She was one of the oldest ponies in town, after all, and the last element of harmony. Pain flashed through her again, but she hid it with a careful smile. Scootaloo shook her head. "No! I was bringing a couple friends by here to pay our respects." She jerked her head back towards the fence where two stallions stood watching. "One of them is a distant relative of Pinky, like a great-nephew or something. It's been a long time, but he was raised on stories about how great she was, so I guess he always wanted to come." The old mare smiled and nodded. That's fine. Just give me a few minutes and I'll be ready to leave you all in peace. Oh, no! You don't have to leave, Scootaloo started to protest, but the mare silenced her with a wave of her hoof. No, it's family. I just be an unwanted reminder of the past. No, I'll leave. Scootaloo shifted and nodded, trotting back to the fence where the stallion stood. The old Pegasus sighed deeply, stretching her legs and wincing when they nearly gave out. Foolish mare, she admonished herself, thinking you could spend the night in the cold like you were young again. She shook her head and looked back at the headstone behind her. I suppose this is our last goodbye, Applejack. The headstone remains stubbornly silent, and the mare chuckled at herself, looking back towards the coming dawn. Twilight again. We've come full circle, I suppose. Another short laugh escaped her, and then she hung her head, gritting her teeth against the pain. But why, Applejack? Why am I the only one left to witness it? The question hung in the air, but the graveyard was quiet as ever. The old Pegasus shook her head once or twice. That question haunted her ever since Twilight's death.